Welcome to the More Than Fitness podcast.
Greetings, podcast friends. I'm coming at you live right now with a brand new, fresh haircut. Your boy's got a buzz cut, and it's because I wanted to try something different. Quarantine's got me going crazy, and honestly, I had too much hair, and I want to try something new. And also, for guys, my hair can grow back in like 2 months and be exactly where it was normally. So not a big deal. And also, I know you guys couldn't give two shits, but I do give two shits, and I think I look amazing. And I hope you think so too. Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Minisode number 41 on the More Than Fitness podcast. Today's topic is how to lose fat without losing muscle. Now, I think a lot of people don't typically think in these terms because they just automatically assume, okay, I'm going to go on a diet, I'm going to lose body fat, and then, everything's going to be fine and dandy. I'm going to be shredded, I'm going to have six-pack abs, I'm going to be muscular, et cetera, et cetera. But what I think people don't realize is that unless you take certain steps to ensure that you don't lose muscle mass as you lose body fat, you could end up looking like like a marathon runner who's kind of, not all marathon runners. I don't want to hate on marathon runners. More so an amateur runner who's kind of like skinny fat. They're kind of like flabby. They're skinny, right? They don't have a lot of fat on them, but they also don't have a lot of muscle on them. And for us, if you want to look really good naked, you got to make sure you've also got some muscle underneath that squishy little fat. Off to an interesting start. But I think the first thing that I want to talk about is the difference between weight loss and fat loss. And that's kind of what we're going for. You always hear people mention that a calorie deficit is key for fat loss and for weight loss, and it absolutely is. But how you come up with that calorie deficit and also the how large that caloric deficit is from maintenance is going to be a big determiner between how much you lose is fat and how much is fat and muscle, right? Because that's important. We want to focus mostly on fat loss, not just weight loss. I think typically what people will say is like they want to lose weight safely, or they want to lose weight the right way, and often they don't even know really what that means. But what I think that means is that the rate in which you lose weight and you lose body fat is slow enough to not put your muscle mass at risk, and also not fast enough to mess with your hunger hormones and your satiety hormones and all of that good stuff. So weight loss would be a conglomerate of losing just everything, total body mass, and then fat loss obviously is just one tissue, which is fat. And believe it or not, fat and muscle are two tissues. You can't like turn fat into muscle or vice versa. They are two completely separate systems basically in the body. Excuse me. There is a difference between weight loss and fat loss. And so why do we lose muscle when we lose weight? And the question there is, it simply comes down to even if we are in a caloric deficit and we're doing all the right things, which I'm about to get into, we cannot pick and choose necessarily where our bodies take energy from, right? Because that's what happens whenever you're in a caloric deficit. So you're burning more calories than you're consuming, and so your body, as a result, has to adapt, and then it ends up burning tissue for fuel as opposed to just the extra calories that you're consuming on a regular basis. It doesn't have enough calories, so the result is burning fat and or muscle mass. So that's why we do sometimes end up losing muscle and fat at the same time. But the way that you counteract this and the way that you predominantly lose fat instead of muscle is a few things. So first is the obvious. You've got to wow, it's tough. You've got to resistance train. You've got to lift weights, right? Or, or do body weight training or whatever. You have to do some type of resistance training to make sure that you are forcing your body to grow muscle, or at least whenever you're losing body fat and you're on a diet and you're in a caloric deficit, you've got to make sure that you give your body a reason to maintain and hold on to the muscle mass you have currently. And for most of you, this shouldn't be an issue as far as losing tons of muscle as you diet down, unless you do something drastic and you try and cut calories a ton and you're also not eating a lot of protein. And also maybe your training plan sucks and maybe you're doing a lot of cardio. And these are all things that I want to touch on. So first, resistance train. You've got to make sure that you do that. Give your body a reason to build muscle. Next is going to be, it's going to come down to your nutrition. So your caloric deficit is going to be the first thing, and making sure that you're losing, I think the appropriate rate for most people is going to be about 0.5 to 1% of your total body weight in pounds. That's what you want to lose, I'm pretty sure, per week. So it's about a pound per week, I think is going to be average for most people. In the beginning of your diet, whenever you first start losing weight and you first go into a caloric deficit, you may end up losing 1, 2, 3, 4 pounds. You're just going to probably lose weight a little bit more quickly because you're also losing a little bit of water weight and a little bit of glycogen in the beginning. So I wouldn't judge your rate of weight loss in the beginning for how much weight you're going to be losing in its entirety. So on week like 2 or 3 of your caloric deficit, that's going to give you a more accurate depiction of how much weight you're actually losing with the given calories that you're consuming on a regular basis. Real quick, if you guys hear noises, Carl is my cat, is playing around with a toy. So here we are. Dad life, you know what I'm saying? Kids these days. But anyway, back to the caloric deficit and the rate of weight loss. I think about a pound per week is going to be standard for most people. Try to lose an average of 1 pound per week. That's going to be key. If you want to get a little bit more tedious and not tedious necessarily, meticulous with this and monitor more things than just weight, because obviously weight isn't the only thing that you should be checking out, but then the other options are going to be body measurements. So I would say taking measurements around your waist. And a good way to do this is just to measure right at your belly button, and then 2 fingers below your belly button, and then 2 fingers above your belly button. That'll give you an accurate depiction of your entire waistline. And then you take those 3 measurements basically, and then you know, okay, if I'm losing body fat and I'm losing centimeters around my waist, then I know I'm probably losing mostly just body fat. Then if you can also measure other parts of your body too, to make sure that you're not losing tons of muscle as well, because what we would prefer is if our waist got smaller, but then the other areas around our body, and of course this is going to depend person to person, but the rest of our body stay remotely the same, right? Like I want my arms to stay the same size while my waist decreases, because that means I probably maintained or possibly even built muscle around my arms while losing fat around my waist. So this is why you want to use more than just the scale. Although the scale, I think, is a pretty good tool. I would use a combination of the scale, measurements, and also taking pictures. That can give you 3 different ways to assess your progress and make sure that you're losing fat and not muscle. All right, got the calorie deficit out of the way. The next thing is going to be protein. Protein is going to be huge. Whenever we're in a deficit, that's whenever protein becomes even more important than whenever we're in a surplus, because whenever you're in a caloric surplus, you've got plenty of nutrients, you've got a surplus of nutrients to go around to fill that role, where whenever you're in a deficit, you don't have as many nutrients to go around, so your body is going to pull from tissues for energy as opposed to the excess calories, right? So this is where what protein does is it helps build muscle mass for the most part, right? At least for our interests. So keeping that, having a high protein diet is going to be key whenever we're trying to lose fat and not muscle, because that's what helps us retain that muscle in conjunction with the resistance training. So I would say whenever you're dieting, 1 gram per pound a body weight is going to be a good ballpark estimate for most of you. The minimum I would say is 0.8 grams per pound. But like I said, whenever we're dieting, a little bit extra protein isn't going to necessarily hurt because it's going to help retain muscle mass and it's also going to help out with hunger. So resistance training, a slight caloric deficit. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you how many calories. Honestly, it's gonna vary between a lot of you. It's gonna be about 200 to 500 calories below maintenance. And if you don't know what your maintenance calories are, I'll make sure to include an article that I wrote on how to figure that out, and then you can adjust from there. Calorie deficit, rate of weight loss, then protein intake. That is going to be very important. Let's see. How much time are we at? 10:48. We're good. We're cruising right along on a beautiful, what is today? It's Friday, actually. Okay. Let's see here. Sorry. Don't want any dead air talking. Yeah, but for the most part, that's mostly it. Oh, and I guess the last thing is one that people don't. Oh, there's actually two things, real quick. It's going to be carbohydrates and cardio. I'll start with carbohydrates first. Carbohydrates get a bad rap for losing body fat, for losing weight, and it's just absolutely from people who don't know all of the research and science and also don't understand muscle physiology, apparently. But we're trying, right? I wonder how many times I've said this. We're trying to lose fat. We're not trying to lose muscle. Muscle and performance in the gym, our weightlifting, is fueled through carbohydrates. It can be fueled through fats as well, but our muscles, they store glycogen, and then our muscles can immediately use that glycogen during weightlifting. So carbohydrates are the preferred fuel source of your muscles whenever you're lifting weights. So it only makes sense to make sure that we at least have a moderate to high intake of carbohydrates on a regular basis. And whenever you are in a caloric deficit and trying to lose fat, it only becomes more important that you are monitoring your carbohydrate intake and making sure that you're eating enough to fuel your training so that you can either maintain or gain your hard-earned muscle mass. Right. So making sure that you have a moderate to high carbohydrate intake. And I think again, this is going to be so dependent on the individual. But I think about a gram per pound for most of you. Again, I'm not just making these numbers up, I promise. A gram per pound is going to be solid. Hold on real quick. I actually wrote, this is why I write articles, guys, so that I can refer to them in the middle of a podcast. One second. Here we are, carbohydrates. When in a hypocaloric state, the article I'm looking at, by the way, is mattmcleod.org/lose fat. All that's it. mattmcleod.org/lose fat. When in a hypocaloric state, consume a minimum of 1 gram of carbohydrates per pound of body weight on training days and 0.3 grams per pound on rest days. There you go. There's your answer. I think about a gram per pound is going to be solid for most people. Anywhere between 0.5 and a gram per pound will work out. Okay. Yes, carbohydrates. Make sure you eat them so that you can fuel your performance in the gym. Next is cardio. People get crazy with cardio whenever they start to try and lose body fat. They just immediately think, okay, I'm going to cut cardio, or I'm going to cut, Jesus Christ. Excuse me, guys. Whenever people try and lose body fat and they try and diet, they immediately cut a lot of calories and they add in lots of cardio. And what this does is a recipe to lose a lot of total body weight, but also increase your risk of a more proportionate amount of that total weight to come from muscle mass. That's not what we want. With cardio, we want the minimum effective dose. Only do as much cardio as necessary, right? Which means, again, the minimum effective dose so that we don't risk losing that muscle mass. And the way that I do this with my clients, unless they just love doing cardio, they're already doing cardio on a regular basis. Whenever they come to me, they like going on jogs, they like running, whatever. I think that that's totally fine. But for most of them, if I don't need them to do it, I don't have them do it. I still say like go on walks and things like that. I don't think that cardio is bad by any means, but if you overdo it, especially too quickly, then again, we increase our risk of losing muscle mass. So with cardio, what I do is I typically try and let people lose as much body fat as possible simply through their diet and just cutting calories slowly throughout the weeks and months. And then whenever they hit a plateau and they're eating, let's say the average male or whatever is eating 1,600 calories a day, that can be pretty low for quite a few guys, and they don't want to go any lower, right? So, okay, what cardio does is allows us to increase our caloric deficit. You're just burning more calories by doing cardio, right? So instead of taking calories away and extending that deficit through food, we do that through cardio and exercise instead. Again, the minimum effective dose to keep our progress rolling at the appropriate rate that we set in the beginning. That's how cardio can be useful. Or if you're wanting to lose fat a little bit more quickly and you want to eat a little bit more food and you're fine with doing more cardio, I think that that's totally fine. Just remember that there's a threshold, and the more cardio that you do, you're putting a risk at the amount of muscle that you can gain and or retain whenever you're in a calorie deficit. So just be mindful of that. Again, minimum effective dose with cardio. Okay, and that, my friends, is how you lose fat without losing muscle. Yeah, I think that's it. Carl, calm your ass down. Okay, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, as always, for listening and for watching. See ya.